Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into this lesson. This should be a quickie. One page, we're talking about compound intervals. So first off, you know what intervals are. You've seen them, you use them, you love them, you know them. Maybe you don't love them, but they're pretty straightforward in terms of within the octave, you have everywhere from a unison to an octave, perfects, majors, minors, augmented, and diminished. The only thing we are adding here is we are adding an octave to the intervals you already know. So if you think about it that way, there's really hardly anything new here. We're just adding an octave, okay? If we go into the gray box here, we're going to see the compound interval is one with a span of greater than an octave. The example they're showing you here is you can see from a C all the way up past the octave to a D. Okay, so it's one step more than an eighth. It's actually a ninth. Okay, so this interval would be called a ninth, and it would actually be called a major ninth. And we're going to explain why we call it a major ninth in just a second. So it explains down here. Compound interval can be named in one of two ways. As the actual distance between the two notes with the quality worked out in exactly the same way as the simple interval. For example, the interval above would be called a major ninth, and as the distance less than an octave with the term compound, for example, the interval above would be named a compound major second. So I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit more, and we're going to do some scribbling in here in this little example because it's important to see how this works. All right. Actually, I'm going to get a slightly bigger tip pen here. Okay. Now, if we had the interval from C to D, we would call that a major second, and of course, you know why. The only difference here is that we've added an octave to the major second, okay, which is why this interval is called major, and that's why it's called compound, okay? If the simple interval, the interval within the octave is major, then if you add an octave, it's still going to be major. It's still going to be exactly the same quality of interval, okay? So by that, in the same respects, if you have a major second, you can also have a compound major third, right? You can have a compound perfect fourth, compound perfect fifth, compound major sixth, compound major seventh, etc. Okay, you can do the same thing with all the intervals. When you add the octave, you call it a compound major whatever, or a compound perfect whatever, a compound augmented whatever. Okay, so that's one way to notate it. It's a compound version of the simple interval. Okay, that's one way to do the notation. The other way is instead of saying instead of saying compound major second, okay, right here, instead of using this language here, we call it a major ninth. And the way you figure out what the interval is you look at the simple version of the interval, okay, or in this case, you look at the major second, and you always add 7 to the interval. Okay, a major second plus 7 is a major ninth. A perfect fifth plus 7 would be a perfect 12th, etc. You always add 7. Okay? Either way, they're both correct. Okay, so the example here, write both names for each of the following intervals. The first one's been done for you. And just to quickly have a look into it and make sure we know what we're talking about. Okay. In the key of D major, we have an F sharp above. The simple way to write it would be taking that F sharp and putting it down the octave. Okay, we'll simplify it first. By simplifying it, we see that it's a major third. Okay, D to F sharp. So we call it a compound major third, or we add 7 and call it just a straight up major 10th. All right? And you can do the same thing with the other ones. We'll do one with you. Let's go, we'll go to the right here. Okay. So the first thing to work out, just like when you work on intervals, look at the interval, look at think of the key signature of the lower note. Okay. You're all seniors, you know what key signatures are all about. The key of E flat major has the 3 flats, B, E, A. Okay. So when we drop this note down the octave to simplify it, A flat down the octave, you can see that this is a perfect fourth. Okay. So to label it as a compound interval, we call it a compound perfect fourth. Or the other way to say it is we call it a perfect what? 4 plus 7. We always add 7. Oops, not 7. A perfect 11th. This is the interval of a perfect 11th from E flat way up to that high A flat. Okay, that should be pretty straightforward. We're just adding the octave. Okay, and then it's just like before. We're doing the same thing from the opposite end. You're being given a lower note, and you have to write down the note that is above. Okay, so a compound. I don't know. Let's go with an augmented 11th. Okay, we'll do the curveball. One of the curveballs together. Right? An augmented 11th. What is an 11th? Well, if you subtract 7, you'll realize it's an augmented fourth up the octave. Okay, so we really want an augmented fourth plus an octave. Okay, so what is an augmented fourth above F sharp? Well, B would be the fourth. Okay, and B natural would be the perfect fourth, actually. Okay, and in the key of F sharp major, you have B naturals. So that B natural is the perfect fourth. To make this an augmented fourth, you have to make it a sharp. Okay, so now it's augmented fourth. And now last step is, of course, taking it up the octave. So your final answer would be a B sharp way up in here. Okay, and of course you can get rid of your rough work. There is your augmented 11th, or your compound augmented fourth. Okay, you're just doing the same thing from the other side. All right, hopefully that's clear as mud. If you have any questions, obviously ask. And we'll carry on to the next lesson next day. Have a good day, guys. See ya.